Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the City Farmers Branch special called City Meeting. It is Tuesday, May 31st, 2022. The time is 3:30 p.m. I'd be remiss if I didn't say and recognize Charles Cox here on his last day as city manager for the City of Farmers Branch. I didn't want him to have an easy day out, so this is why we scheduled it so late in the afternoon. So with that, we'll go ahead and call this meeting to order, and we're going to jump right into B1 and C1. These are items that are somewhat connected, and so for that point, plan on discussing them both since they're interrelated. So B1 is consider approving resolution number 2022-059, authorizing an interlocal agreement for jail services with the town of Addison and take appropriate action. And C1 is Ordinance 3747, conduct a public hearing and consider adopting Ordinance number 3747, amending Chapter 2, Administration, Article 6, Personnel, Division 2, Municipal Retirement System, Section 2-581B, to provide any city employee who is a member of the Texas Municipal Retirement System deemed eligible to retire with at least 20 years of credited service in the system and take appropriate action. Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening or this afternoon, I think we've got a unique opportunity to discuss an option. Back in August of 2011, the cities of Carrollton, Farmers Branch, Addison, and Coppell worked with the Justice Department and the National Institute of Corrections on a regional detention facility feasibility study to look at was there a better way of handling the detention centers for all four cities. At the time, Coppell and Addison were faced with having to make major upgrades to their facilities, and they were trying to determine what their best course of action was. Subsequently to that study, Addison and Coppell contracted with Carrollton, paying Carrollton roughly about $100,000 to $200,000 annually. That contract Carrollton recently notified Addison and Coppell that contract would end effective September of 2022. In January of this year, Addison and Coppell approached Farmers Branch to determine if there was an interest at the city to do either a regional facility, just the three cities, or to look to see if we had capacity in Farmers Branch. Those negotiations continued through early May, during which time Coppell decided they had a better option with using either DFW Airport or the city of Louisville. Negotiations continued with the town of Addison. Recently, the deal points came together in that Addison would be willing to pay $300,000 annually, plus a COLA adjustment, with prisoner caps on an average basis. Their volume is currently a little bit less than 3 on average per day. Be a 10-year contract with a 10-year renewal with a 1-year out clause on either side. And then there'd be acceptance and transportation protocols that would be put in place. The opportunity here is that the negotiations, once they arrived at that $300,000, that was the number that I remember as being the cost to implement a change from the Texas Municipal Retirement System to go from 25-year to 20-year retirement. That is a highly desired benefit by a number of police officers, though I might add it's not desired by everyone, because when employees look at their retirement, they look at the system is based on the number of years of retirement in terms that dictates exactly how much your pension benefit is going to be. If you retire at 20, your pension benefit is dramatically less than if you retired at 25 or like me at 36. So most folks have indicated they cannot afford to retire at 20-year, but there are some employees, again, predominantly police officers, that have indicated due to their circumstances, they wish to take advantage of a 20-year 20-year retirement. I might add that the benefit of 20-year retirement is offered by every city in this area with the exception of Richardson. Over the past week, the mayor, myself, assistant city manager, deputy city manager, and the appropriate chief has met with every single shift of fire and police to determine their interest in a 20-year retirement, realizing that the jail services agreement with Addison would be the funding source. During those meetings, we explained the opportunity, made sure that the employees understood the commitment, listened to the concerns, and then at the end of those meetings, a vote was taken. The results of those meetings were that all employees were concerned about COLA, the cost of living adjustment. Every city around Farmers Branch has reduced the COLA adjustment. So that was something we heard loud and clear. Carrollton, there were concerns about the Carrollton contract. And through the contract negotiations, we sought to mitigate any concerns that Carrollton had in their relationship with Addison. One thing we heard loud and clear is the detention officers are understaffed. We're budgeted for 12, we're down 5. The problem is region-wide in that it's hard to find detention officers. It's not a sexy job. We committed to full staffing. If it took signing bonuses like we have for our patrol officers, we currently offer $5,000 as a signing bonus for a patrol officer. Whatever it requires, in order for us to make sure that our detention officers are safe and adequately staffed to operate a jail facility, we're committed to doing that. Additionally, there was interest from the detention officers in having a step pay system, which is similar to what the police officers have. We're committed to considering that certainly as well. They currently are on the merit system like the non-sworn employees of the city. I mentioned the last thing that we had was a vote. Virtually 100% were in favor on the fire side, and a strong 60% were in favor from the police side. There are 4 major implementation benefits of this opportunity. First, there would be an external full funding source for a highly desired benefit, predominantly by the police department. Current jail utilization is at 30 to 40% at a cost of $1.4 million per year. If we had any other facility in the city with that low of utilization, we would strongly look at outsourcing. And quite frankly, we did about 7 or 8 years ago. Yes, there is growth on our west side, but we believe that even with the growth on the west side, and making assumptions that Farmers Branch residents occasionally get in the jail, which I know that never happens, but we did look at the potential for growth. We still believe that the current scenario is that the jail is utilized at a very low level. So this provides an opportunity to utilize that facility. Third, TMRS benefit alignment with other cities, which would also provide a side benefit of being able to laterally hire under the retirement system. If you work or ever work for a 25-year city, then you always will have 25-year retirement. So if somebody came here and worked for a few years and they decided they wanted to go to Addison, for example, even though Addison has 20-year retirement, the individual would still have to wait 25 years for retirement. So whenever you touch a 25-year city, you're always a 25-year retirement employee. So that prevents employees, police and fire especially, that want to come to Farmers Branch. They may be prevented from even applying or dissuaded from applying because we are a 25-year city as opposed to a 20-year city. Another side benefit is that by having an external full funding source is that reduces the need to reduce the cost of living adjustment to fund the 25 versus 20-year retirement. As I mentioned, every city that touches us has reduced their COLA. And then finally, employees, mainly police and fire, will feel that they're not locked into a profession that they may wish to leave before 25 years. We've heard from a number of folks that have indicated that they want to move to another profession or do something else rather than continue to be a police officer or a firefighter. And that would be a benefit of going to 20 years. And with that, Mayor, that's an overview of how we got to where we are today.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. And as Mr. Cox indicated, I was at a majority of the meetings with both police and fire. several days last week trying to hear directly from them what their thoughts are on this agreement. This is something that, as we had discussed internally, if the police officers in the fire department, who the burden this will fall to, did not want to do this, this is something that would not see the light of day. And having those conversations and hearing from them, their concerns, there was kind of a consensus that they were going to take an individual vote, which Charles recapped during his briefing there about how 60% in the police department were in favor, overwhelming support in the fire department. And when you hear that, you kind of have to listen to the people that this is going to affect. And that's why we wanted to have that meeting. We wanted to hear from them. And one of the things that we heard from the police department and the fire department was this is the first time that city council and staff in the administration department have come forward to have this conversation and actually listen to it in an open setting to where you can get this true feedback. And it was a setting to where any comment was open for discussion. We truly wanted to hear their concerns. And as Charles indicated, one of the things that came out of that was this need, and what will be a priority for us moving forward is how do we get to full staffing in the detention facility? How do we make sure that these people are compensated for the work that they're going to be doing in a tough market? And that is something that we explained to them and expressed that we will commit to moving forward with that, because that's what they deserve. It's much like a lot of the changes we've made with the police department, new comp study, a lot of things there, keeping more tax dollars in the budget last year to make sure that we could get up to fully staff and overhire, knowing that there's going to be some changes, knowing that people are potentially getting close to retirement. That is a priority for our community, and that's something that we want to maintain, and that's something that the council committed to. This is another extension of that commitment. And so, with that, we've heard from Charles, the recap, what this could potentially look like. But before we open this up, because this is a public meeting, we have a few people signed up to speak. I want to see if any council members have anything that they would like to share or ask at this time before we go to the public. Councilmember Williams.
I just have one question on the 25-year city versus a 20-year. Would that become retroactive? So if someone had previously been with us at the 25-year, if we made that change and they were, say, in one of our sister cities, does that then become retroactive, and now they are eligible for the 20-year?
Councilwoman Williams, yes, that would be retroactive. Anybody that's ever worked here in the past, it would apply to them.
All right. Seeing no one else signed up to speak, I will go ahead and open it up to those who have requested to speak. First up is Vicki Harrison. I know you've signed up to speak to two different items, so I will give you your full 6 minutes. I will give you your full 6 minutes since you signed up to speak to both B. Can you speak to can you say that into the microphone, please? Yes, ma'am.
My comments have to do with two separate agenda items.
I know
There's one item on the agenda now, so I only want to use 3 minutes on this item, and I want to use the other 3 minutes when you get to the second item. We've kind of opened up both of them, and so my comment to you was I'm going to give you the full 6 minutes so you can spend 3 minutes on the jail contract and then 3 minutes on the retirement, which was both items. So the council has already said everything they have to say regarding both items on the agenda, is that correct?
We can have more discussion later, but I just asked every council member if anyone had any questions at this time, and only one person clicked to speak, and so from that, I'm now opening it up to the public.
Okay, so first, I'm limited in the ability to participate regarding the jail contract as a fully informed citizen due to the announcement of this council meeting posted only on the agendas, not prominently, without a study session regarding two complex topics that have lasting impact on the city, called by the mayor on the Friday afternoon prior to a Monday holiday, scheduled in the middle of the afternoon on a business day, which limits citizen access and participation, and is the second consecutive meeting where the mayor forbids citizen comment. Specific concerns include the inmate census over the 10-year term. You partially addressed that as the city grows, as well as the demographic differences in Addison and Farmers Branch inmates. In meeting with the police regarding street racing, I recall them mentioning the fact that the jail would perhaps have insufficient capacity due to the number of people involved in those street racing incidents when they take over your yard, your street. And so that's a concern to me. Another concern is that Farmers Branch will have to transport the Addison inmates to the Dallas County Lou Sterrett Justice Center for incarceration, and that will be a drain on manpower because the average time for the check-in rate is 7 to 9 hours. So that would be anywhere from 2, maybe 4 police officers that would be off there an entire shift. So is that require a mitigating circumstance and more officers to cover that? There are other issues I'd like to address, but time is very limited. The primary issue to me is the rush to complete this without information dispersed to constituents and amongst council about a fundamental change in the way the city conducts business. Why today was there a council meeting urgently necessary when the Addison does not need an answer now and there is a city council meeting on Monday? Also, my question is, when did the council get this information? If it was on an individual basis, that is an individual quorum. And so when did the body politic come together to discuss all of this and study the issues so it would be open to past council members as well as new council members and to the public? And I've searched and searched, and there's no record of any such meeting. So I would think as a council, you'd like to study the issues a little more thoroughly rather than in this hastily called meeting. Searching for a plausible explanation for the rush I can't find one. I don't understand why it would be. And so I'm not opposed to the jail proposition, but I request a postponement due to the unconventional characterization of this meeting, the lack of transparency and the lack of public information, so that it could be fully vetted by the council and then a vote be taken. That's what I am requesting. Now, as the retirement agreement, the current council meeting on that issue as well, did you have a study session where the new city councils provided the same information that you had gathered over many months? I don't think that's true. To me, it marginalizes 40% of the council because they haven't had the opportunity to discuss those meetings, that data in a study session or other venue. So, and this is not much of a public hearing for people to participate in, for one thing, because of the lack of time prepared for people to take off work. We operate for all municipal policies, and they've been studying this for years, but it's amazing that presto changeo, in 3 days you had all the answers for a retirement plan. So again, there's no record of the entire city council meeting to discuss these issues thoroughly and be aware of all of the ramifications of every decision that you're making. And I'm asking that you meet as a body with the newly elected city council members and give them the opportunity to have input and for you to inform them of what you've done previously to this day. Otherwise, it's curious to me, are you just trying to marginalize the new members because you've already decided and they're only 40%? And so you can just outvote them? Because you've not given them sufficient time since they've been sworn in to fully investigate all of these issues. Or say nothing, mention it to the police. So it's implausible to me that there's a good reason that had to just mysteriously occur on May 31st. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, if you'd like, I can respond to a couple of those.
Yeah.
Mayor, in regards to what you just heard, I do want to respond to a few of those items. First, in terms of the transport, that was one of the items that I mentioned that in talking to Carrollton, they were concerned about. And so one of the mitigating factors in the contract is we provided that if a prisoner does become ill and they get ill according to the protocols in our jail, where they have to be transported, that it's required that an Addison officer meet or go with that transport to the hospital, and it'd be the Addison officer that would sit on the prisoner, guard the prisoner while they were in a medical facility, because certainly we don't want our officers being out of service or have to get overtime. Second, the issue about 20-year retirement, virtually as long as I've been here, it's been something we've discussed thoroughly at every budget workshop. And it's always come up, and we talk about it quite a bit. One of the concerns we've always had is that $300,000 cost for a benefit that many employees will not use did not seem to be a good use of taxpayer dollars. And so the councils at the time have agreed with me on that, and that's why we've not pursued that. By having an external funding source, that kind of alleviated that concern. And then finally, one of the urgencies here, I mentioned that the negotiating points really didn't come together until recently in May. The driving factor in terms of timing would be that September 1st requirement of Addison to find another facility. So if we don't act fairly quickly, they will pursue other options. And with that, that's all the comments I have.
Exactly 40 seconds. Into the microphone, please.
In all due respect, Mr. Cox, that's not what I referred to. I did not refer to medical transfer. I'm referring to the fact, and I don't have a copy of the contract, but I can guarantee you it's there. Anytime they're transported to the Lou Sterrett Justice Center, it is done by a Farmers Branch police officer or 2 officers. The check-in time now is from 7 to 9 hours. There are numerous people with the county that I can refer you to that will validate that. That means officers are not in the city on their shift. They're downtown at the Justice Center trying to get the prisoners processed. And so the medical, I think, is incidental. I'm not expecting there are going to be tons of transports to the hospital. But it's significant that they won't be here for their shifts because they're processing prisoners. That's extremely time consuming. And I know the police chief would have to agree to that number. So that's not what I was referring to whatsoever.
Then let me clarify. Any transport would be on Addison. The medical transport that was the concern. That's what the concern Carrollton had was in terms of the medical transport.
Can you please ask the city attorney to refer to the contract so this matter can be resolved?
3.8.
3.1I.
Under 3.1, Farmers Branch shall provide the following service collectively jail in accordance with Farmers Branch Police Department policies and procedures, applicable federal and state laws and regulation. I, transport or arrange for the transportation of Addison prisoners to the Dallas County Lou Sterrett Justice Center for incarceration.
Okay. Right. But that would be, now that would only, Chief, would you, my understanding is that would only be for felony convictions, right, or felony charges?
David Hale, Police Chief. They run their own vans, and they come and pick up the prisoners that are to go to Dallas County. So,
Now I remember it.
so that they have a rotation where they just send a van and they come and get the prisoners and take them down.
Okay, so the concern expressed about our officer having to transport down to Lou Sterrett and wait the 7 to 9 hours, that was an unfounded concern.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Just on occasion, we have to do it, but it's on an individual basis.
But it does occur, and it is in the contract, which says it's not.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. Next is Joseph Ragel.
I'll pass it on. Thank you,
I have enough for the city council and the mayor there.
Just name and address whenever you're ready.
Okay. My name is Joseph Regal. I live at 13647 Greystone Drive near Brookhaven College. Let me first thank the 5 members of the city council and the mayor for being public servants of Farmers Branch. You each volunteer your time and energy and expertise for the purpose of making our city a much better place to live and to raise a family. Thank you. I'd like to give you my thoughts on Ordinance 3747. By decreasing the pension requirements from 25 years to 20 years is certainly a way to help attract top talent and to retain top talent. The reason I would like to speak is to suggest some other ways the city could use the Addison money to accomplish the same objective of recruiting top talent and retaining top talent. First, use the Addison money to make the health care benefits package more attractive by reducing the premiums each employee pays. Second, make the vacation packages more attractive either by increasing the number of paid vacation weeks or by decreasing the years in service to receive paid vacations. Third, increase the city's contributions to each employee's 401k profit sharing account. Fourth, increase employee wages. Fifth, increase employee bonus amounts. In conclusion, I'll leave you one additional thought. Poll all of your employees who work for the City of Farmers Branch, asking them which they prefer. A, the pension reduction of 25 years to 20 years. B, decrease of premiums paid by employees for health insurance. C, more attractive vacation benefits. D, increase city contributions to employees' 401k profit sharing accounts. E, salary increases. F, larger employee bonuses. And if there's no consensus as to what to do, y'all could decrease your property tax rates. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is David Moore.
David Moore, 14615 Cypress Point Drive. Thank you to the mayor and the city council for your continued service. I think council should adopt this ordinance. You have the funds, you have a plan, you can fund from many sources. I'm not a financial expert. You guys have those on staff. I'm not an attorney and I'm not a police officer, so I'm not an expert in any of those areas, but I think this is a kind of a no-brainer. The money's there and there's a place to put it. I think approving the ordinance would help with employee retention. It would ultimately reduce any costs associated with high employee turnover, and it would ensure that Farmers Branch remains competitive with the surrounding cities. So I encourage you to vote for ordinance number 3747 to provide the city employees with the 20 years of credited service instead of 25. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is former Councilmember Harold Froelich. You have also signed up for B1 and C1, so I will also afford you the full 6 minutes.
Thank you. Before I start, I want to give my 3 minutes of my 6 minutes to former Mayor Glancy. He got here a few minutes late, and the city secretary wouldn't let him fill out a form. Would that be okay? I'll only take up 3 minutes if I can give him 6. 3.
I'll allow that.
All right, thank you. I wanted to talk today about some historical issues we've had with the city of Addison. And when I read this, I'm kind of neither for or against, but I did read the contract, and something in there in that contract piqued my interest. And Charles mentioned it, but he didn't mention the lesser of 3.5% or the cost of living. I'm concerned that the city does not need the $300,000. We're collecting more money than we've ever collected before, and we're opening up our citizens, especially our police officers, jailer, to potential liability. This is a litigious world. I would, after reading it and think about it, hearing some other citizens, I would think real hard about signing this agreement with Addison. Their problem, not ours. They can go somewhere else. With regard to the pension, we discussed this 10 or 12 years ago. Mayor Glancy had a citizens committee for the pension. Almost everyone I ever talked to that was a city employee, and Charles will tell you, we went over this for a long time. Texas Municipal League people came out here and talked about the pension. This is the kind of decision that will affect the city by millions of dollars. I did not talk to a single person at that time who was for a 20-year retirement because, as Charles mentioned, I can't accumulate enough money. This plan is not a defined benefit plan. It's not a money purchase plan. It's a hybrid plan that where you get credit for service and you're putting money into a bucket every year. Now, you don't know that because you haven't read the plan, you haven't studied it. You also don't know that every year you can adjust the cost basis of this plan by a vote of city council. Anybody know that? I know you didn't, but I'm telling you, you can. It's in the original plan, the original document. A decision like this should not be made at a specially called meeting until you guys understand what we currently have. When these people retire at 20 or 25 years, we used to pay part of their medical insurance. You need to think about that. I'm not currently updated on that, but at one time we started paying these people $500 a month. Think about, you work here for 25 years, you started when you're 20, you're 45 years old, you don't qualify for Social Security or Medicare. Who pays your health insurance? What responsibility does the city have for that time to retirement? That money comes from somewhere. That's your job to do your homework. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Glancy, I'll let you have the remaining 3 minutes of Mr. Froelich's time.
Good afternoon, Council. I kind of question doing something like this in a special meeting. I think it kind of questions the integrity of the city council. And I think when your integrity gets questioned, it gets much harder to rule and make sound decisions and get the support of the community. That being said, I would really more like to talk to the employees of our city. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto when he was in England, and it was during the Industrial Revolution, and management was putting terrible class on labor people, and his thought was that labor was going to rear up and overthrow leadership and take over control. It did in certain areas, in Russia and different places like that. In the rest of the free world, unions came into place. Unions were a great thing when it started out, and what happened was the unions took up the power and supported the workers and got compensation for them. Like many things, unions got out of hand. And when they got out of hand, it forced most companies to move their businesses out of their cities or out of their even out of their country. So it's one thing to have a great compensation program, but if you don't have a job, it doesn't mean anything. You've seen pressure being put on to privatize a lot of the businesses in this city. Recently I've been in California a couple of times, and I've observed the fact that there is a tremendous amount of private security companies springing up in California to take over the job of policemen because the compensation has gotten so high. and they'll level it down. And I think that's probably part of the reasons you're seeing the fact that a lot of this defunding the police today is coming in the result of people are looking for other alternatives. And so I think we need to look very hard. You know, we're living longer and longer. I'm 81 years old, probably reasonably good health, and, you know, probably need to work longer, not shorter time frame periods. So I think that people need to start thinking about this and thinking about whether compensation, because somewhere down the line, pressure will start coming back to the fact that, you know, we have to look at alternatives. I think municipal police departments are the best one we have, and they're probably better than private policing, but that can happen. Okay? And one last point. Last time I got involved in compensation programs, I had a dead rat placed in my driveway by some city employee. Now, I'm not easily intimidated, and I have cameras on my home, so please don't do that again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Glancy. That is it for our portion of citizen comments, and so with that, I will open it up to council for further comment and discussion after hearing from our residents. Councilmember Williams.
Can we get a little clarification on the medical benefit?
Sure. Back in terms of retiree health benefits, that we recognized back in, I guess it was 2007, if I remember right, that was a benefit that unfortunately was not sustainable. And so we grandfathered existing employees, and for all new employees, they do not have that benefit at retirement. The existing employees that were grandfathered, which represent, I think we're still about 35-ish% of our employees are grandfathered. And we capped the benefit because realizing that medical inflation grows. And so we capped it at $580 per month for those employees that were grandfathered. Ultimately, that liability will go to zero. And by the way, it's only to age 65. And so, you know, the traditional employee, I mean, public safety employees tend to retire a little bit earlier, but a lot of employees tend to retire closer to that age 65. So for the most of our employees, you're talking about a 2 to 3 year benefit capped at $580 a month. And ultimately, that will go to zero because the grandfathered employees will have retired.
Councilmember Roman.
So I guess just after hearing some of the citizen comments, I have a few questions. Because, you know, the first time that I heard about this was, you know, when we met Robert last Monday, and you mentioned that you met with other council members already. And I don't know if there's any more information that maybe I can consider and look at, because these are really big decisions, and I'm just a little concerned. And when I was going through the packet, the one question that I couldn't answer with all the information that was in here was kind of what the urgency was, and I guess I understand a little bit about it more now, but I remember reading through here, and I believe the contract says that it wouldn't be effective until, let's see,
September 1st on the jail services contract, and
right.
July 1st for the
right.
Texas Municipal Retirement.
So I didn't know if there was maybe some more time, because it sounds like, just from what I'm hearing from citizen comments, that they also feel like it's a little bit rushed. And I've had a few people reach out to me, and, you know, one of the things that I harped on whenever I ran for office was that when something gets to city council, I want people to feel like they were involved in the process or knew what was coming, because sometimes when it gets to city council, it's too late for them to voice their opinion, because people's minds are usually already made up. And so I don't know that people have had the opportunity to really see it coming, and it would look very poorly upon me when people email me and say, hey, this is what you promised us in your election, and you've not delivered that. So I feel a little bit hesitant about moving forward. I'm inclined to support these two, it's just not at this moment. For instance, the TMRS information, I have 2 pages to consider about it, and I don't know any other history information about it, and I've not had an opportunity to visit with Carrollton or anybody else about it. However, I do have some questions just from the information that was provided. The first question that I have is, will you remind me how much, I think you mentioned it, how much Carrollton got for the similar contract that we're engaging with Addison?
Sure. Carrollton was right at about, okay, it was $100 per, the charge that Carrollton had for Coppell and Addison was $100 per prisoner per day.
And is that the same rate that we're receiving?
No, that was way underpriced, and at the 300,000 for an average of, they'd be capped at 4 for the first 4 years, but right now it's just under 3, so that comes out to, I'd have to calculate that out. I don't have that, but it's substantially more than $100 per prisoner per day.
The other question I had was, when assessing this contract, were there any risks that you identified, either legally or otherwise?
In terms of, as I mentioned in talking to Carrollton and asking what were some of their concerns, we tried to mitigate that in the contract itself. In terms of, I might add that we see a lot of Addison folks, or folks that are coming from Addison already, in that if you talk to the police chief, there are a number of folks that are at Addison restaurants and bars that drive down Midway going somewhere, and they many times are intoxicated. So we see a lot of the Addison prisoners already. They just are coming through our city at that point in time. But in terms of a liability, one concern that frequently comes up is, okay, so if you have someone in your jail and something happens and they sue, then that would be that additional liability I think you're alluding to. That could happen with any person in the jail, whether it be an Addison prisoner or whether it be one of our own. It could also be, I mentioned we're in the neighborhood of 30 to 40% at occupancy. You're going to have a higher chance of liability if you're at 100%. But we have 25 beds, and we have to be able to operate whether we have 0 prisoners or 100. So we can't use liability as the defining factor, because if we use that as the defining factor, we would never take a prisoner at all. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So yes, will it add a little bit more liability? Yeah, but just any time we get closer to trying to take advantage of our capacity, you're going to have that. But in Texas, there are tort laws that limit our ability and how much we have to pay, and we have insurance currently in place that would mitigate that factor.
And does governmental immunity at all come into play with something like this?
Yes, it does. I mean, the city's immune unless there's a custom or practice that violates clearly established constitutional norms. And so if a jailer or someone at the jail violates our policies, then and we knowingly allow that person to be employed there, we could have liability. But those are the same issues we have day to day with the police department and fire department anyway. So in addition to what the city manager said, there's no additional liability taken on. You have those same risks today.
Okay. And Charles, you mentioned that there were some risks that you identified through your conversation with Carrollton, but that they were mitigated with the contract. Can you talk a little bit about what those risks were and what you did to mitigate them?
Yeah, the main risk was, two main risks were that in terms of transportation, if there were an Addison prisoner that became sick, who would be guarding that prisoner when they're in a medical facility? So that was mitigated in terms of Addison would be required to provide an officer at the medical facility. I did not realize that a number of Addison patients already go to Dallas Medical Center, so that's already a dropping off place, if you will. The other concern was prisoners delivered to our custody that were not in that still might have a medical condition, and so they would be maybe just dumped on our doorstep, so to speak. And so we made sure we had protocols that in order for us to receive and accept a prisoner from Addison, that they had to have certain they had to have a certain medical condition in terms for us to accept it. Otherwise, the Addison Police should take them directly to the medical facility and not rely on us to secondarily take the prisoner to the medical facility. So we mitigated that in the contract. Those were the two main things.
Okay. Were there any other risks other than liability that you weren't able to mitigate through the contract?
Those were really the only ones that I could consider. I mean, the contract is a contract, and so theoretically, but one of the main areas that is not delineated exactly in the contract is what's called standard operating procedures, and the contract alludes to standard operating procedures between the police department, fire department, and Addison to make sure that there are accepted things. It may not be in the contract, but still acknowledgement of a way we operate to make sure that prisoners are handled appropriately. One of the nice things about having it in a standard operating procedure is that can be tweaked as time goes on if if we decide that, hey, there's an additional fact that needs to be considered or altered or tweaked, it can be readily and easily done through the standard operating procedure, as opposed to having come back to council and completely added into the contract.
Okay. And that was my,
Yeah. And they're required to comply with this.
okay. Yeah, that was my next question on who is going to be putting together the standard operating procedures. Is it going to be a board? How is that committee going to be formulated or put together?
Ultimately, that'd be the chiefs, but they're going to have folks in each of their organizations that would provide recommendations to them.
Okay. And then I wanted to comment, there was an individual who made comment about the transport to Dallas County, the Justice Center down there. And I believe the chief mentioned that they would be bused. So if they're going to be bused, would we be able to remove under 3.1I where it says transport and just say a range of the transport or of Addison prisoners to kind of remove the responsibility from us and leave it just on arranging it? I mean, if they have a bus that frequently comes out here, I don't know what the schedule looks like.
Yeah, Chief, do we contract for that service, or is that just something they kind of automatically provide?
The sheriff is in charge of the county jail, and so it's a service they've provided. There are times whenever we might have to say we need to get somebody down there because maybe they do have a medical issue that we can't deal with, but we can't let them go. In those circumstances, we will actually transport them, but that's not a common everyday thing.
Okay, so you believe that's rare, but it's useful to have that language in there.
Okay. The other thing that I saw when I was reading through it was the adjustment for CPI. I believe one of the speakers also mentioned this, where it says it's the lesser of 3.5% of the service fee or the CPI adjustment. So my first question is, I read in 5.2, section 5.2, that it's using the CPI from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Dallas-Fort Worth, Arlington area. Were there any other indexes that were reviewed in consideration for this? And if there weren't, how did we arrive at this one?
The reason that one was chosen, actually, the more local, the more accurate in terms of inflationary index, and that's typical of what we use, like with our library contract, for example. We use a similar index, if not that very one, in terms of an inflationary index. So that was, but that's fairly common to use that.
Okay. What do we use for the library?
Ben, do you remember offhand? It may be a tweak on that, but you'll know better than I do.
Mayor and Council, Ben Williamson, Assistant City Manager. So we were using the Employee Cost Index, and it had a cap in there of 5%. We removed that to cap it at 2.5% every year. We looked at the average and found it was more favorable for Farmers Branch to lock it in at the lower end. So on this end, it actually protects us because it's locked in at 2.5% every year as the escalator versus using a variable that we'd have to agree upon on that one. So on this case, it's the opposite is better for us because it locks in the lower rate. So we were using the Employee Cost Index, which was not an index I liked using in the first place for that, but once we had an opportunity to change it, we locked it in at 2.5%, which since this is a bill we're paying, it's more favorable for the city of Farmers Branch.
I see, okay. So the follow-up question I have to CPI is, I went ahead and I pulled the history for the past, since 2002 for CPI, just to kind of, I'm a financial person, by the way, so that's why I have these financial related questions. And it looks like we're essentially limiting the most that it can increase to 3.5%. And I was just kind of curious why, because I see that in the past maybe year, CPI has increased to about, I think, I'll get the exact number for you. It says it's 9% for March of 2022. So if we're capping it at 3.5% and we go through an inflationary period similar to this, then who's picking up everything above from 3.5 to 9%?
Yes, I'm aware inflationary, this year is unusual, that we'll all agree. And historically, over the past 10, 15 years, it's been less than 3.5%. The 9% is, we are seeing in some areas inflationary impact on city cost. However, in the jail, we're not seeing, predominantly, that 1.4 million is predominantly personnel cost, and we're not seeing really a 9% driver on that side. So I guess that's an attempt to be realistic in terms of what our basket full of goods is not necessarily a 9% increase. It's to acknowledge the fact that personnel are not that, in our instance, it's not that high. And so that was a negotiation point with Addison.
Mm-hmm.
But traditionally, 3.5% should be more than adequate if we go back to historical levels of inflation. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. In terms of, I was just mentioning that in terms. Okay, all right.
And so, let's see. Is there a possibility if the CPI ends up being negative, will we end up getting less money than the previous year?
Yeah, I'm not aware, I mean, I guess.
Well, I'm looking at the BLS.gov website that gives me the history since all the way from 2002, and there are periods where there's been a negative number. And the way that it reads on here is that it's going to take the difference between last year and this year. That delta is going to be what we adjust for moving forward. So if it ends up being a negative number, I'm just curious if there's the possibility that it goes down below the previous amount.
Is that a monthly number year over year, or is that an annualized number?
Monthly number.
I mean, you'll have periods, but I think, is this on an annualized basis, or do we adjust it monthly?
It's an annualized basis, if we request it.
So I'm just wondering if there's ever a potential for it to go down, or if we can protect ourselves by adding language to say, to not be lesser than the previous year.
I mean, theoretically, you're correct, but I will tell you, and not to say that it's right, but we have a number of contracts in the city that have CPI clauses in them. I'm not aware of any contract protecting on the negative side. Now, I'm not saying, again, that's right, but I'm not aware of any contract that has that provision in it.
Yeah. Okay. I also noticed that there's limitations on the number of prisoners that we could take in, years 1 through 3, 4 to 7, and then 8 in all subsequent years. So I'm assuming that an SOP would be created on who would be responsible for keeping an eye out to see, okay, do you have an idea on who that individual is going to be? Is it going to be the chief? What position they would normally have that makes that call?
I don't know the exact person in the police department that would have that responsibility, but there is it would rely heavily, I'm assuming, on the detention supervisor, but one of the provisions in that contract is that if it appears that the trend is there's going to be more than, on average, 4 in that first year, that we may, and there's a term may in there because there's always special circumstances, we may refuse prisoners to bring it down to that 4 average per month.
Okay. It's nice not to be limited to 3 minutes anymore.
Careful what you wish for.
Would this be the appropriate time to also ask questions about the second agenda item that we have on here? Or are we going to wait on that for now?
Yeah, discuss it all now.
Okay. Let's see. Charles, you mentioned that after you took the poll from the police department, there was about 40 people that were not in favor. Was there a common theme as to why they weren't in favor of it?
It was 60% were in favor.
And 40 not in favor?
40% not in favor. The concern expressed that was vocalized to me was that the concern was, hey, if something went wrong and a future council decided to get rid of the Addison agreement, that we were still on the hook for $300,000, and that a future council might consider adjusting the COLAs downward like many of the cities around us. And so there was depending on where you are on the spectrum, if you're closer to retirement, cost of living adjustment is considered fairly important. And so a number of those officers approached me and indicated that was a concern, that could be an outcome, and that they prefer not to touch the existing pension fund because of that.
Okay.
And I heard that also from the fire department as well, but that didn't necessarily show up in their vote, but I did hear that from the fire department as well.
Okay. So in the chart that was provided, it doesn't have a page number on here, but it's I guess page 34, because it's after 33. The chart that compares current and then option 1, it mentions supplemental death benefit, and then it has an A. I don't know what A means. And I didn't know if it was germane to the conversation or not, but I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah, the supplemental death and benefit A is for just active employees. We used to have a supplemental death benefit for our retirees, and that benefit was cut during the benefit committee that was alluded to earlier by a previous speaker. They mentioned, okay, there was a committee. One of the outcomes of that was to cut that particular benefit. The retiree death benefit was $7,500 capped, and so the thought was that was not a real valuable benefit, and so at the retiree level, and so that was cut. So that's why you see the A. It's still, okay. If you're an active employee, you still have that benefit. If you're a retired employee, you no longer have that benefit.
Okay. And then the other question that I had was, what is the actual dollar amount? I read somewhere that the amount that it's going to be increased by is 1.11% of the city's payroll, but I was looking for an actual dollar figure on what that increase would be, and see how it matched up to the $300K we're getting from Addison.
The current, in terms of the general fund, remember we have a number of funds. The general fund is where most of our employees reside. The TMRS cost right now is $5.6 million per year. That additional 1%, that's applied to full-time as well as overtime, and that would equate to the 300. Actually, it's like $305,000, but that's based on 100% budget. We currently budget 100% of full-time and 100% of part-time. And so if we have vacancies, that means that we'll use somewhat less of that budget. And so that's why we just rounded it down to $300,000.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the contract from Addison will bring in $300,000. the cost to move to the retirement from 25 years to 20 will be $305,000 approximately.
At full employment, which we never have. So
Okay.
that's why we ran it down to 300. So, but it's,
So when we write the check to TMRS or whomever it goes to, what will that amount be?
TMR, remember.
For the, you know, the additional cost of moving from 25 to 20?
Yeah, the cost of, there's not no one's going to write a $300,000 check to TMRS. The way it works is the city is not in Social Security, so, you know, in Social Security, you pay 7%. We're not in Social Security, so what happens is the employee puts in 7%, then we do a 2-to-1 match of 14% effectively. And that's how you get to that 300,000 would be after every payroll, whatever that 14% equates to, that's the check we send to TMRS on a biweekly basis.
I see. Okay. And then, is there a certain period that we're going to have to make that $300 and something thousand payment to make up for moving from 25 to 20 years?
At this point, I would consider that from a permanent fixture. The unfunded liability that is increased is roughly about $2 million, and so there has been a thought that after the $2 million unfunded liability is paid for with the $300,000 per year, that the $300,000 would go away. I don't know that that's necessarily true. Keep in mind that the numbers we're talking about are all based on actuarial studies. The actuarial study is done on a calendar year basis, and it's based on, you know, you're familiar, I'm sure, with actuaries, and they're making assumptions that may or may not hold true. That $300,000 is based on an assumption of how many folks might take advantage of 20-year retirement. It could be more or it could be less. So over time, every year they do that actuarial study, that number could change. Same thing with the mortality tables. You could have more employees that pass away than they had originally thought. So all that factors into that study. With the information we have right now, the best number the actuary has given us is that 300,000. So we just have to assume on a go-forward basis that 300,000 will continue. And that's why I wanted to make sure that on the Addison agreement, that it was a fairly long-term agreement, 10 years with a 10-year renewal. So it would match a long-term obligation with a long-term revenue source.
Okay, so essentially it could be permanent, is what I'm hearing, is that right? And the amount, that $300,000 could go up?
No. The actuaries have indicated that'll be the amount from now on out. But like I said, you know, an actuarial study, things could change. Quite frankly, with the stock market going down, that could change the actuarial study as well. So there's a number of things that are factored in.
Okay. One other question I had was, if you've considered how many employees are between years of service of, I guess, 19 and above. One thing that I'm particularly concerned about is if we had a major exodus of people saying, well, I'm ready to retire, so I either have to wait 1 year or I don't have to wait at all, and I just fill out my resignation and follow Charles at the door.
A number of employees have indicated it'd be nice to have a 20-year retirement, or just know you could, even though they won't. And so that goes back to my original concern with doing this in the past, is because I hate coming to council and saying, let's spend $300,000 for a benefit that folks just think will be nice and they don't take advantage of. With an external funding source, that kind of changes the dynamic. But in terms of folks, I mean, you can look at people retiring early in a number of ways. I mentioned earlier about, you may have some employees that feel that they're a little bit locked into the city for a longer term than they wish, and they really want to get out and start another business or go and enjoy life or start a different profession. Another way of looking at it as well is that, okay, you've got longer term employees that would be leaving the city. They would generally be replaced by less expensive employees, quite frankly. And so, you look at it from a lot of different perspectives. You could also, and I've also heard the argument that you're losing seasoned, tenured employees that have a lot of experience, replacing by folks that don't have that much experience. That's a concern. So we're trying to weigh all those different factors. But at the end of the day, I think that the trying to say that we want to lock people into a job for 25 years when virtually every other city around us has chosen not to go that route. I think that's, and especially for the millennial generation, that younger generation definitely don't look at staying with anybody for a long period of time. We hope for at least 20, quite frankly.
Yeah. So is there a way to obtain that list and see kind of what department could be the most impacted should we pass this and then, people decide to leave?
Yeah, but we could. But the other thing to think about is keep in mind that if there's employees from other cities that had, like for myself, I had 7 years of experience with another city. So that may or may not be something Farmers Branch knows about me. So it gets a little bit more complicated because then you have to start doing a little bit more of an advanced survey of employees to say, hey, do you have prior year credits from either another team or a city, or perhaps the county pension system that also those years apply is credited against ours as well. So it's a little bit more complicated to try and get that. It's good because years of service can come from a bunch of different organizations, not just TMRS.
Yeah. I personally would really like to have it. I know that it's cumbersome, but I really want to make sure that we at least have that, because I don't want to be kind of caught with holding the bag and figuring out where we're going to hire a bunch of people should we have a mass exodus, because the job market right now, it's really hard for employers to attract quality employees.
Yeah.
And so that's just the only concern I have.
And keep in mind on that like for myself, I have 36 years in TMRS. So if you looked at me as okay, Charles has 25 years of service, is he a flight risk? Well, I stayed another 11. So you almost have to have a survey plus, are you going to leave anytime soon question.
Well, we can always just not ask the second question, but the first one. Is that something that we can work on getting?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
And will us moving from a 25 to 20-year city impact the payout amount for employees at all? To my understanding, it's not, but I just wanted to ask the question.
When you say payout amount, what
So their monthly benefit amount that they would be receiving, let's say we pass this, someone retires after 21 years of service. Given that they've retired before the 25 years, I just wanted to double, triple, quadruple check that their monthly benefit amount wouldn't have differed if, from the previous one.
No, it has no impact on, 25 versus 20 just on itself, absolutely, it's a different amount. But if by passing this, would it impact a current employee, say at 21 years? Absolutely not. Their benefit would be the same, the annuity amount would be the same under either scenario.
Okay.
I don't think Charles would be leaving tomorrow if he thought this was going to impact his payout.
And then the other question I had, which kind of goes along with what Council Member Williams asked earlier, to my understanding, there was a large number of employees from the police department that went on to take part of a new company, NTEC, that was the kind of the central telecommunications place for 4 cities. Those employees that ended up there, I don't know what kind of retirement plan they have there, but I just wanted to make sure that whatever they may have lost or whatever, moving over, that they would also kind of be retroactively credited for the decision we're making today.
Yeah, the TMRS only applies to cities because NTEC is not technically a city. They went under the county system, and the county system provides for organizations like NTEC, they allow, or like Dallas Central Appraisal District, they're in the county system. And so the county is a little bit more expansive on who they allow in. It's a different retirement system. years in TMRS apply towards that retirement system, but it's completely different, and the action that is before you this afternoon would not impact that in any way.
Okay. And those are all the questions I have for now.
All right. Councilmember Merritt.
Thank you, Mayor. Charles, may I ask how many detention staff openings we had? I heard the number in the beginning comments, but could we go back to that? And then what is our pipeline for filling those positions at the current time?
Currently, there are 12 budgeted. We were down 4 until a day or 2 ago. Now we're down 5. And so in terms of the pipeline of hiring, we are actively, I don't know if you've seen recently in the paper and on Fox 4 News, there was a discussion about detention officers regionally. It's difficult to find a detention officer. When we did the major compensation study last year, we made sure that their pay ranges were competitive with all the cities around us. And remember, we pay 5% more than the median. Even that being said, we were having issues with hiring. And so since the compensation study was done last year, we bumped up the ranges twice and still are having problems getting people to apply. That's not, quite frankly, just a problem with detention officers. We've had it in a number of areas. Planning staff was a good example, where we were more than a year without a couple of planners. And so where we've been successful in in other jobs is having a signing bonus, and it's been between $5,000 and $10,000. That's a lot of money, but sometimes you pay what you have to pay to get someone to work. And quite frankly, a detention officer is an important position to keep both the officers as well as our prisoner guests safe. And so we've committed to make that happen, and we'll market it. We have folks that are actively out there trying to recruit, and we'll continue to do so. But it's challenging.
So Charles, how is the police department adjusting to the 4 lost detention officers, or 4 openings now? And we have now a 5th, we understand. So are we using police officers for those roles, or are we covering it with the existing detention officers? How is that working?
I'm going to have to ask the chief to help me with that one.
Thank you.
So we don't have police officers that are now, being taken away from their other duties to actually work in the facility. We may stick around a little bit longer to make sure that a prisoner's put away. So we may be adding a little time there. But we want to make sure that, our detention staff is taken care of as well. And so that there may be a little added time there just to make sure everything's good, but we're not using officers for.
Does that accumulate to overtime for the detention officers?
Yes, it can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chief. So I'd like to look at these 2 items separately, if I could, and really work towards the engagement with the Addison agreement. I know they're on a timeline, and so are we, in order to make these decisions. The TRMS issue with having the additional funds seems reasonable to look at it at a little bit a longer pace, if you will. So I'm hopeful that during the discussion that we have today, that we can perhaps, I know there's connected, if you will, the dollars from one contribute to the purposes for the other, but I hope we can look at them a little bit separately and a little bit more elongated in the process of understanding the ramifications. I'm leaning towards approval of both. I'll say that openly now, but I need to know more and have more discussion. So I look forward to that from the rest of my peers up here on the council. So that's all I have for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor.
I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of questions. I'm going to try to organize those in a way that makes sense, but bear with me. Okay. I want to first start with addressing the CPI provision in the contract. I do have an annualized number. If I take this contract and I go back 10 years and try to simulate the contract over the last 10 years, the annual CPI increases average about 1.94%. And there's actually a year in there where it's negative. This last year, as you say, is an anomaly, and I get that, but it did go from a 0.5% increase in 2020 to a full 5.25% increase in 2021, which is pretty significant. I don't particularly care for the lesser of provision in the contract. I would suggest it should be a greater of, so that we have a floor that's predictable, that floor being 3.5%. Because by not doing that, then we cheat ourselves over the next 10 years out of about $50,000 if history repeats itself from the last 10 years. So that's one provision that I would strongly suggest we take a look at. This has got to be a good deal for Farmers Branch residents and our police department and our employees. So that's one element I would suggest that we take a look at. I've heard that we're on an accelerated timeline here, but I have not heard someone say we must respond by X date with Addison or the deal is off the table. What is that date?
Well, obviously, with September 1, they have to have a place for the prisoners.
Right.
And so they're going to need to strike a deal fairly quickly with somebody. They won't have a city manager as of August 2nd. I know that doesn't matter to us, but that's part of this calculus as well. Additionally, you're going to have a number of council members that are out of town for the second meeting in June. And we only have one meeting in July. Again, that can all be changed. But those are kind of some of the parameters that we're thinking about at this point. But in terms of, does it have to be tonight? No. But it will need to be fairly soon in order to, if I were on the Addison side, I would, if this didn't happen, I would immediately start going and looking elsewhere.
Okay.
Because it took January to May to get just to where we are at this point.
Yeah, so to that comment, were there study sessions and discussions around this contract and all of this prior to today?
No, because we weren't to a point where, if it wasn't, the dollars really hadn't been coming to, we'd not come to a, quite frankly, from a dollar perspective, if it had been less than 300 grand, it would not have been worth talking about, because this is not without a headache aspect.
Right.
And so it became the $300,000 came up in May. Now, in terms of were we working on a jail services contract? That's something that I'd mentioned to each council person in our weekly meetings. That was something that was under review, with more to come as we got closer.
But the council at large has not had an opportunity to do this Q&A and deep dive into what this contract means?
No.
Okay. So how do we know that the $300,000 is the right number?
It's a negotiated number. It's roughly double what Addison's paid in the past. 300,000 is, I mentioned that the jail contract, our jail budget is 1.4 million. 300,000 is a large chunk of that. And I was looking at it more from a selling of capacity, as opposed to a per person charge. Most other cities, they look at a per jail per day charge, and then they charge a la carte for meals and for ambulance transports. And it becomes, when I reviewed the other contracts for the other cities, it looked like an administrative headache of having to go through and keep track of all that and true up at the end of the year. And so my thought is, hey, at the end of the day, we're selling capacity. And in the back of my head, 300,000 was kind of a number that seemed fair and also seemed to not give away our services, because we have a valuable product, so to speak. And so it seemed like a number that was appropriate and fair. And could it be larger? You know, that's just part of negotiations, but it seemed to be the right place. Especially with the COLA adjustment, because over 20 years, as you know, that will dramatically increase.
So the COLA adjustment over 10 years only nets us about, again, if history repeats itself, about $50,000. So 10 years from now, instead of $300,000, it would be $351,000. And that's assuming that we have another pandemic and some crazy stuff going on with the CPI. I don't have any concerns about using a local CPI. I do believe that that's appropriate, but I don't think that it is, I don't think it's much money. And I think that this deal could be better for us and a little bit more ironclad with a better CPI using a greater of as opposed to a lesser of. That way, we have a 3.5% floor. And if we have a 5.25% jump like we did from 20 to 21, then that difference is covered. We have 12 typical positions as jailers, right? That's for our standard Farmers Branch prisoner traffic, which we run about 30 to 40%. We have 25 beds. They're all operable. So if today we got 25 prisoners, we could put 25 prisoners into a bed. There's no repairs. There's nothing that's closed or not usable because something's broken.
No, we're functional. The only thing that's coming up is obviously we're redoing our building. And so that's going to be something that we're going to have to consider. But no, we're fully operational.
Right, so that was my next question. I know we have some planned improvements for the Justice Center. What's the impact on beds? We have to close down 3 beds or?
We'll just have to move folks around and let them work in one area, make sure it's a secure area, and then move them to another area, let them do that area. So we have a plan for that.
Okay. So running at 30 to 40% normal capacity, that's 8 to 10 prisoners per day on daily average. We have 25 beds open. With the Addison contract, we're looking at 4 to 6 max. Right, 4 for the first 3 years. Sounds like we have some padding in there for unusual number of arrests or whatever.
Correct, and also a consideration is not necessarily, we talk about housing, which is whenever we start talking about beds, but a lot of our folks never make it to housing because they're not going to be there that long. And so we have holding up in the front, right where the detention officers are, so they can keep eyes on them. And if they're not going to be there very long, they never make it back to the housing.
Understood. But suffice it to say, if Addison has arrested someone, to the extent they need to bring them to Farmers Branch, they're probably going to stick around for a day or two, right?
Correct, until we can get them transported either to the county or they're released because they've paid their fine or the citation that they failed to pay, and they take care of it and they're released.
Okay. So we're down 5 now. We need to hire 5 in order to handle the 8 to 10 average daily prisoner count we have in Farmers Branch alone. We're not planning to hire more jailers to handle the additional 4 to 6 that we're going to take on from Addison.
Not at this time. We're going to evaluate, what we have and let my staff, give recommendations in regards to, whether or not they feel like that is needed.
So we're going to stress test an already strained staff of jailers. We're down 5. We can't get them, even giving them $5,000 to $10,000 signing bonuses, which, by the way, do we have any kind of golden handcuffs on those bonuses? They have to stick around, or they can quit next week and take the money and run?
Yeah, keep in mind, we haven't started issuing those bonuses yet. Yeah,
Okay.
that's something that, we just had those meetings last week. So,
But more information that we're not privy to, that we feel kind of rushed into making a decision, I think that needs to be part of the plan. I don't have anything against signing bonuses to hire quality people and keep them, but we need to do something that keeps them. Money disappears quick.
Correct.
It becomes meaningless fairly quickly.
Yeah, we generally do require that, and so that would be something that, you know, we, as I mentioned, we just mentioned that last week, and so that would be something that, I know we do that for, I think, your patrol, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so we'd have that same restriction on the detention officers.
We have retention agreements for people that come out of academy,
An actual agreement?
an agreement that says if you leave within a year or 2 years, you've got to pay us back what we paid to take you through schooling, or,
I don't believe that that is being done currently, no. There's nothing that I'm aware of from HR, from us.
okay. These are really important to make the most use of taxpayer dollars that we're spending on resources that come and go so quickly and cause strain, particularly on our public safety measures. Agreed?
Correct. Yeah, and our HR director is not here, but that would be the question for him, is to, you know, what is the clawback? And what are our legal abilities to claw back
Okay.
in the public sector?
So I want to go back to the $300,000 number. I think we're all kind of treating this number like it's a free and clear $300,000. It seems to have just dropped out of the sky here. But there's costs associated with taking on this contract. We talked a little bit about the liability. If somebody from Addison comes to our jail, slips and falls, or gets injured and sues us, while we might have that same liability with a Farmers Branch prisoner, we wouldn't have that liability if an Addison prisoner were not in our jail. So it's not an existing liability, it's an additional liability to the city. So there's a cost to that liability. Do the insurance requirements in this contract extend beyond what we have today? Is there additional insurance that we're taking on?
No,
So-
there's no additional insurance required.
So
Because we have insurance that covers the facility, we have insurance for public official liability, so we have $2 million coverage. So we have more than adequate insurance coverage, whether we have 8 or 12 or 15
Okay.
detainees.
And we've checked with our insurance carrier and let them know we're considering an interlocal agreement with another city to take on more prisoners. Is there any kind of adjustment to our premiums required for that?
Yeah, correct. We use, the Texas Municipal League, they cover both cities, and so, yeah, there's
Okay.
not a problem with that.
Okay. So, again, there's costs that are going to come out of this $300,000. We're going to be providing more meals. There's going to be more cleanup in jail cells because we got more people in cells. There's going to be more clothes issued if we have to issue clothes. We may need to hire more staff. I mean, the list could be pretty long if we really wanted to sit here all night and talk about the costs associated with almost doubling our prisoner count. What happens if we take on more than the 4, 5, or 6 maximum average daily prisoner count? Are we getting compensated for the above average count?
No, the contract was specifically structured so that we have the ability, we don't want the additional volume. So it was structured specifically so that we have the ability to turn away any volume that goes above that average.
Right. We have the ability to do it, but if we do it, we're only going to have about 8 or 10 folks in the prison. We're going to take on maybe another 6. We're at 16. We still have 9 beds left. It could be a Texas OU weekend, and we've got a lot of Farmers Branch prisoners in there, but more so probably Addison prisoners because that's where they all go to party. Our reporting is a maximum average daily prisoner count. That reporting is done on a monthly basis. It's required within 5 days following the end of each month. It's an average. So at any given point in time, we could have more of their prisoners in our jail than the 6. So I don't want anyone to think that we get to 6 Addison prisoners and we lock the door. That's not the case. We still have the capacity. But if we have the 6, and yesterday we only had 2, that average is only 4. And so is our staff prepared to keep up with those counts so that we don't exceed an average? How are we going to handle that administratively?
So we'll have a minimum, we have a minimum staffing standard now, and we will maintain that minimum staffing standard in order to make sure, because obviously the safety to our detention staff is paramount, and we will make sure that we staff accordingly.
So minimum staffing requirement, but we're still down 5 jailers today.
Correct.
That's almost 50%. That's pretty thin staff to then be adding more prisoners to an already strained staff. Let me stick with the cost thing for a moment. If my math is right, if I'm doing the calculation correctly, this 1.11% of the city's payroll, if I just look at the last CAFR and, let me find it. In 2021, our covered payroll, now I don't know if that's the same thing as what this letter is referring to as city's payroll, but I'm going to assume covered means anyone that would be covered under the pension plan, because this is coming from our TMRS supplementary information page. Would that be accurate?
That sounds about accurate.
Okay, so in 2021, our covered payroll was $31 million. 1.11% is $344,000. Has our payroll gone down since then?
As I mentioned earlier, the general fund is, the numbers I was referring to was the general fund. We have. Could you speak up, Charles? Yeah, sure. I was referring to was the general fund, the water and sewer fund, the hotel motel fund. We have other funds that have employees that have TMRS costs. The general fund is where most of our employees reside, and so that's where the differential is.
So general funds where most of our employees reside, but the schedule I'm looking at is all of our employees.
Correct.
And that would be our cost.
Correct.
So it's really $344,000 if this is last year, not $300,000. So we're already in the hole $44,000 with this $300,000 number from Addison.
If you're looking at all the funds, that's correct.
I'm looking at everything we're supposed to pay for under the retirement plan. Am I wrong?
Not when looking at all funds compared to general fund, no.
Okay. So the cost really, if we're in 2021 and our payroll's not gone down, is at least $344,000 according to TMRS's letter that says 1.11% of the city's payroll.
Okay.
Okay. We're under water $44,000 from the start. On top of that, over the next 10 years, we'll be under another $50,000 if we don't negotiate a greater of in the contract. We have a strained system of jailers at 50%, a little more than 50% employment rate. We're having a hard time hiring new jailers, even considering $5,000 to $10,000 signing bonuses. I realize those haven't been implemented yet. That's only about half of my questions here. Half. We haven't even talked about my questions on the retirement front, which, let me be clear, I support changing the retirement plan from 25 to 20 years. I think it makes sense to make us competitive with the cities around us. And I bet you'll see in the next couple of years after that, Richardson will change theirs too. They'll have to. We're being forced to. I do support that change. However, using what you call external funding source at this time seems to me not only to be rushed, but doesn't make a lot of sense. We're underwater already. What is, Sherelle, do you have what our current covered payroll is today? It's updated from the 2021 CAFR? No, I don't have it. So then we can assume $31 million or more is an accurate number. And so throwing around $305,000 is not the right number. It's $344,000. I can't, in good conscience, support the Addison contract, mainly because I don't think it's been given enough consideration in the interest of Farmers Branch. And I don't really care how much in a hurry Addison is. As someone mentioned earlier, that's their problem. But I just can't support this Addison agreement, and I respect my fellow council members' differences of opinions, but I can't see how you'd support that either. Given the numbers that we were given, the 2 pages of retirement information that we were given to review, one of the tables which requires someone to explain to me because it doesn't mean anything to me. I had to go to last year's CAFR to get my data. And as a council person, I can't help but feel suspicious. That's all I'll say.
Councilmember Driscoll, do you have anything?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. A couple of things. It's been alluded to that we have 2 new council members. Fact. I also was sworn in as a new council member in 2020. And after I was sworn in, I took my seat back here. We still had the COVID protocols. And from that moment on, I was voting on things that I didn't have a year or 2 years of institutional background. I wasn't party to, and I attended basically every study session and council meeting the year before. But regardless, as has been indicated here by former Councilman Froelich, there have been discussions for a number of years on all the issues that we discuss here on a regular basis. And I can remember several conversations last August when we were at our budget retreat. And compensation for fire and police was one of the topics that we discussed. And I'm very happy and very proud that we increased headcount for the PD and other departments that we needed as our city is growing. We also discussed a lot of these other things which Mr. Regal brought forward here. The other suggestions, he has 1, 2, 3, about 6 of them. And some of those I would be supportive of. But, and I appreciate we have 2 new council members here that, you know, haven't been privy to all kinds of discussions that have gone on before. But I think both of these agreements make sense. And I also had discussions with Charles and with the mayor about, well, what if people start hitting the exit door? And I know from discussions I've had over the last years with Chief Hale and current Chief Latimer, we have many officers and many firefighters who could have already retired. And we are blessed that we have a lot of dedicated employees throughout the city in all departments that love working here. And just last week, I was in discussions with the leadership out at the fire department. And I know Chief Latimer said there was a gentleman there that night, one of our firefighters. He has 37 years with Farmers Branch Fire Department. That's just a business risk. If someone is going to leave for whatever reason. I've had discussions with Chief Hale. We have lost officers who've made a move and left us, not because they were unhappy, not because they weren't paid well, but they wanted to be closer to a relative in Grand Prairie or Keller or whatever. That's just part of business risk. And I have always supported our fire and police. I always will. And as has been discussed, and many of us have known for a long time, Farmers Branch has been at a competitive disadvantage in that almost all municipalities have full retirement for their city employees at 20 years. And I understand there's cost. I'm a businessman myself. I worked in the finance industry. But I do not think that there's anything here that is wild, that is unreasonable, or that's not realistic on a business sense. And as has been discussed here, there are limits on how many prisoners we would be taking from Addison. They will be guarded and transported to medical facilities by Addison police officers, even in their own van, apparently. And there is never a perfect agreement. And since I've been on council, we have voted on many, many things that I've not been an expert on, whether it's creek repair and erosion, or with Mr. Bentley on the sewage, the drainage system that we're systematically replacing with millions of dollars. And so I can appreciate, how some people feel on this, and we've had people speak out against this and for this today. I think it makes sense, and I support both of the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jackson?
So, Councilman Driscoll, just to make sure I'm clear, you think both of these proposals make sense as they're written?
Correct.
So going into a $300,000 revenue contract with at least $344,000 of costs makes good business sense to you?
In general, I would say no. But you're taking 1 year, last year, or where we are now with rates of inflation and all of those considerations.
No, sir, I took 10 years. I took 10 years of costs. 10
Well, if things maybe were reversed and we did not have capacity, and Carrollton or Coppell or Addison had capacity, we might be on the other side of this situation. So I understand what you're saying, but we cooperate. Our PD backs up Addison, Carrollton, other PDs around here, and vice versa, and the same with our fire department. And we have cooperative agreements on different things. All of the fire department is trained here in Farmers Branch. That's a liability. The guys are up like 4 stories high, I think, aren't they? At the training facility. There's cost and liabilities to everything. And, we share the dispatch with these other cities. So I don't think it's unreasonable for us to move forward with both of these.
So I have trouble reconciling that with, Mr. Cox, you had said in the past this has been considered many times. I've heard the same thing, that spending $300,000 just wasn't a good use of the city's money to improve or enhance the retirement. But Mr. Driscoll, you're okay with basically taking $44,000 of taxpayer money and giving it to Addison. That's why I go back to, is the $300,000 the right number? Because I don't believe that it is. And I think that there are provisions in this contract, one of them being sharpen the provision around transporting prisoners to Lew Sterrett. Make sure the language says that we're not doing that. Language also says that when Addison is accompanying a prisoner on a medical issue, they're transported by Farmers Branch Fire Department. So we're using our fire department. We're taking firemen out of the station to transport a prisoner for a medical issue. Just want to make sure everybody's clear about that particular provision. That's a cost. Okay, that year we transport 10 or 15 or however many it is, there's a cost cranking up the fire truck or the ambulance, taking this prisoner somewhere. Deduct that from our $300,000 check we're going to get from Addison, and the $44,000 we're already in the hole for. I don't agree with the math, and I'd ask that before you agree with it, that you do the math. It's not good for the citizens. It's not good for Farmers Branch. When was our last compensation study done where we evaluated all of our compensation and benefits and retirement?
Last year.
Last year. there was a comprehensive study done.
Every 5 years, it's required by.
Okay. The last one that I found online was back in 2000 I want to say it was 16. August 2016, there was a comprehensive compensation study that was done. Last year's was just an update, is what I found online.
The financial policies of the city is every 5 years, a major compensation study is done, and then every other year, between the 5 years is an interim study.
Okay.
So, but the major one was done last year by the same company that did it in 2016.
And in 2019, we decided to move to the 105% median pay range for employees to be more competitive. Right? That's been in effect for a couple of years now.
It's 2016. Yeah, I think you're right, 2016.
2016.
Yeah, it's been quite some time.
Was part of that decision because we had a 25-year retirement that kind of kept us from getting people?
No, that was just a decision of council because that really, in terms of, when you look at that comprehensive look, you also have to look at, on the retirement side, you have to look at the level of cost of living adjustments, that kind of thing. So on the retirement side, we're fairly in sync comprehensively. So the decision was made from the council perspective is that in order to attract kind of a first tier of police officers and employees in general, because that applies to all employees, is to set it at 5% above median when we're doing that major compensation study.
Right, right. So I got to think, when you're looking at compensation across the board, and this is the way I look at my pay and where I'm working and where I want to work, it's the cost of my benefits, my salary, a bonus perhaps, or commission if I'm on that kind of a schedule, the retirement plan, be it match, the opportunity to contribute more. And I got to think that if that employer's falling short in one category, they got to make it up somewhere else in order to get me to come to work for them. So in making it 105% as opposed to 100%, are we considering dialing that back now that we're going to spend a couple $1 million on changing our retirement plan from 25 to 20 years? Does that make us rich if are we benefit rich if we go to 20 years instead of 25?
The compensation plan, in terms of where we fall short, on the retirement side, it's not. That's why it's beneficial to look at an external source to pay for that. Now, if all we're talking about is a difference of $45,000, could that be negotiated with Addison? Certainly. But in terms of, where we compare in overall compensation, we're going to be on par easily with the top tier folks in this area.
So, again, you said an external funding source. That's assuming that contract stays in place for 10 years. At some point during that time, Farmers Branch or Addison has a right with a 1-year notice to bail. And that means that if we make that decision, then we've got to decide to bail knowing where that $300,000+ is going to come from next to cover off what we may decide to do here today. Or if Addison bails.
Yeah, correct. A lot of things could happen in the future. But as I mentioned early on in my conversation, we were looking at outsourcing our detention center because we are quite a bit under capacity at this point. So that equation would come back into play because there are other options for us, significantly less expensive options.
My thinking is that compensation and benefits, and you guys know more about the city environment than I do. I've never worked for a city. The compensation and benefits are overhead, and that should be paid for. We're always going to have that overhead, and that should be paid for by a source that we're always going to have, and to me, that's tax revenue. And I'm puzzled on a number of levels, but I'm puzzled as to why it's been so difficult over the last, sounds like decades, if this has been something that we've discussed since you've been here, that we've never been able to come to a consensus to enact it, and all of a sudden today, we have some golden egg that gives us the vehicle to do this. And we're going to ignore the cost, we're going to ignore the risk, and plow forward. Again, I say it just doesn't make sense to me. I'd like to see a list of the people with years of service from, let's say, 15 and up, so that we can understand what kind of exodus to anticipate. This contract's going to create, and the agreement to the change in the retirement is going to create potentially staffing issues. And we're already having problems with staffing issues, not just at the jailer level. So again, I support the 25 to 20 year in theory. It's how we get there that in good conscience I just cannot support. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Williams?
We are discussing two separate ordinances here. And I know that we've tied them kind of together because they make sense financially, that we have found this new revenue, and at the same time, we have identified for years that we have this need. If you're for switching us from 25 to 20, but you're against at least 300,000 up to 344,000 if your calculations are correct, not taking into account the other funds that those other employees come out of, then what you're saying is that you would like us into a bigger hole. You would like taxpayer dollars to offset this change from 25 to 20 year. You would like that to be a taxpayer when we have an opportunity and we have a vehicle to offset the 300,000 of it. I'm just trying to clarify that's what, because you're for the switching from 25 to 20, that's one ordinance, but you're against our ability to have this other form of revenue from what is a grossly underutilized amenity of the city.
Yeah, you're allowed to discuss between yourselves.
So at last check, and this is as of the last fiscal period, our unassigned funds balance, which we target to maintain 15 on the low side, 20% on the high side of our annual expenditures, was funded at almost 35%. Is that accurate? We got a ton of money we're sitting on. Do we have plans with that money? We have plans with that money, and it's not to put our employees first? Because in the world that I come from, employees are your greatest asset. And if they're our greatest, I believe the same in the city, and if they're our greatest asset, then why weren't they a priority last year when we decided not to lower the tax rate and take advantage of an extra $1.4 million of tax revenue? You want the taxpayers to pay for signs and streets, economic development, parks, before we say, for 20 plus years, we've been talking about changing our retirement structure. We have an opportunity to at least cover half of that bill with that money.
We have an opportunity to cover 90% of it.
Not with this, not with a contract that's not good.
It is.
No, it's not. I just pointed out.
One at a time, one at a time.
I'm sorry. When you do the math, it does not add up for the taxpayer, and that's what I'm here for. You can't argue with the math.
Correct. We have $300,000 that will offset that the taxpayer doesn't have to pay for, and you're saying no. So
That's
you're
correct.
saying you want the taxpayer to pay 100% of it instead of offsetting it by $300,000 with non-taxpayer dollars. So to me, that seems pretty clear of where you're trying to protect the taxpayer. You're saying you want them to fund all of it, all 344,000 versus them funding possibly 44,000.
How do other cities fund it?
I'm not on that council.
Have
I'm
we
on
looked
this
at it?
one.
Yeah.
We need to do research and understand, how would you do that?
They reduce the COLA.
They
Or-
reduce the COLA.
Yeah. I mean, another option would be to increase tax rates, but that's not going to be,
We did that last year.
but not for employee benefits.
We didn't increase the
We did not
rate.
increase the tax rate.
Yeah,
The tax rate was not lowered, okay?
That's not increased.
To properly characterize it, and we took advantage of the additional $1.4 million of tax revenue that's coming out of my pocket, not for employee benefits, our most important asset, but for streets and parks.
It
So,
wasn't just streets and parks.
If you want,
It wasn't just street and parks. We overfunded our police by 2.
After you already-
Did you watch the budget?
Again-
Because those funds covered everything.
with all due
including-
respect, go to the presentation and do the math. You'll see that after the 1.4 million is spent, the footnote at the bottom of that presentation is, oh, and we're gonna hire a couple more police officers. The money was already spent. There's 600,000 on parks,
I was at that
600,000 on
meeting.
streets.
That
One at a
was not a
time.
footnote.
One at
That
a
was
time.
not a footnote. That is not a footnote. That was a 30-minute long presentation. We didn't make police a footnote.
Police were a footnote, and I will eat my hat on that statement.
Were you on that budget? Were you on that retreat? Because it wasn't a footnote.
I have a copy of the presentation that was given to the citizens of Farmers Branch.
The video?
I have it in PowerPoint.
I'm gonna clarify this real quick. Richard, in whatever document you're looking at, yes, it might have been listed as a footnote. But that was a priority of council at the meeting when the decision was made. Now, we can talk about how it was communicated to the public or put in that document at a later date. But the decision at that time to not lower the rate was because it was important for us to ensure that our police had enough funding to get accurately hired and overhire, because we understand the challenges we're facing today. And so that was a commitment by us then. However it was listed on that piece of paper, fine, correct. Next year we'll make sure it's bold and on the top. But from council's perspective, that was a priority.
Okay? You said it, Mayor. Streets and parks, economic development, and monument
I
signs
didn't
were
say
a
any of those
priority
things.
over our employees. And so, Councilmember Williams, if you want to say, I want the taxpayers to pay for our city employee staff salary and benefits, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to say. We're always going to have tax revenue. We're always going to have salary and benefits. We won't always have a bad contract from Madison. And that's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any comments at this time? Based on reading the room right now, the recommendation would be, let's see if we can get some more juice on the contract and get you guys the document of the number of employees that we have that are from 15 years on, 19 years on? 15? Okay. And I will make a motion to continue this hearing at a later date and with the public hearing as well. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Roman. Is there any more discussion? I'd ask you all to mark your vote at this time. Not pulling up? All right.
I'm sorry, Mayor, can you please repeat the motion? Because I'm trying to hear what you said and read this too, and it's not connecting.
It's a continuance. Yep.
Yes, there's a continuance.
Yep.
Thank you.
Motion carries 5-0. Seeing no other business to conduct tonight, we will adjourn tonight's meeting at 5:29 PM.